At the end of the last episode, I gave you one hint about this video. I said, you have almost certainly seen this script before, you just didn't know you were looking at it. Today, we're gonna prove that. Because somewhere in your camera roll right now, or on your Instagram feed, or in a travel documentary you half-watched, there is almost certainly a photograph of an ancient Brahmi-derived script carved into stone, written on palm leaves, painted on ceremonial cloth, hanging from a temple gate, and you looked at it and thought, beautiful, and moved on. Today we're talking about Aksara Bali, the living script of the Balinese people that survived Dutch colonization by hiding inside religious practice, and the Javanese script Hanacaraka, which nearly disappeared and is right now waking up on street signs and school whiteboards across central Java. This is the story of the scripts that didn't need a revival, because they never fully died. Every year, approximately 5 to 6 million tourists visit Bali. They come for the rice terraces, the ceremonies, the temples, the spiritual aesthetic that has made Bali one of the most photographed places on Earth. And at virtually every single temple, on virtually every single ceremonial object, on the sacred cloth hanging from the gateposts, and the palm leaf manuscripts stacked in the shrines, there is an ancient script, a script descended directly from the same Brahmi ancestor we've been tracing through this entire series, a script that has been continuously used in Bali for over 1,000 years. Those tourists photograph it constantly. It goes on Instagram with the caption, "so beautiful" or "so spiritual," and almost none of them know they're looking at one of the only fully living indigenous scripts left in all of Southeast Asia. Aksara Bali didn't need a revival. It never stopped. Now this video has a different emotional shape than the previous two episodes. In Baybayin, we told a story of near-death and revival. In Lontara and Batak, we told a story of slow erasure and simultaneous awakening. This one is different, because Aksara Bali's story is not primarily about loss, it's about concealment. It survived by being so deeply embedded in Balinese spiritual life that no colonial power could separate the script from the religion without destroying the entire social fabric of the island. And even the Dutch, who were not squeamish about colonial destruction, calculated that would cost more than it was worth. The Balinese, consciously or not, built a survival mechanism into their civilization, and the mechanism was genius. But there's a second script in this episode, the Javanese script, Hanacaraka, which nearly disappeared and is right now waking up on street signs and school whiteboards across central Java. This is the story of the scripts that didn't need a revival, because they never fully died. Aksara Bali descends from Kawi, the old Javanese script, which itself descends from the Pallava variant of Brahmi that Indian traders and missionaries brought to the Indonesian archipelago in the first millennium CE. The chain goes Brahmi in India, Pallava in South India, Kawi in Java, Aksara Bali in Bali. Each link in that chain represents a culture receiving a writing framework and bending it to fit its own phonology, its own aesthetics, its own sacred needs. Aksara Bali arrived in Bali approximately in the 10th or 11th century CE, around the same time the Laguna copperplate was being written in the Philippines. When you zoom out and look at the whole Indo-Pacific picture, you're watching an entire hemisphere learning to write over the course of a few centuries. Script literacy spreading across the ocean the way a tide moves, unstoppable, inexorable, finding every shore. Like Baybayin and Lontara, Aksara Bali is an abugida. Each character carries a consonant with a built-in inherent vowel modified by diacritics to change the vowel sound. But Aksara Bali has a few features that make it more complex than its Philippine cousins. It has two character sets, the basic Aksara Riastra for everyday Balinese text, and the more ornate Aksara Swalita for Sanskrit religious texts. It has specific characters for sounds that don't exist in any other language in the region. And it has a system of stacking characters. When two consonants appear together, one sits physically on top of or below the other in a vertical stack. Reading Aksara Bali requires recognizing both individual characters and how they interact spatially. It is not a simple script, it is a sophisticated one, and it has been taught continuously, generation to generation in Balinese communities for over 1,000 years. The Dutch East India Company established control over much of the Indonesian archipelago through the 17th and 18th centuries. Java, Sumatra, Sulawesi, one by one they fell under the Dutch administrative and commercial machine. But Bali was different. The Dutch didn't achieve full military control of the island until 1906 and 1908, the era of the Puputan, the mass ritual suicides in which entire Balinese royal courts walked into Dutch gunfire rather than surrender. It is one of the most devastating and defiant acts of resistance in colonial history. By the time the Dutch had full administrative control of Bali, it was already the early 20th century, and the colonial project globally was beginning its slow unraveling. The Dutch had much less time in Bali than they had in Java or Sumatra. They arrived late, they stayed for a shorter period, and crucially, they arrived in a place where the culture was so visibly, undeniably sophisticated that some colonial voices actually argued for its preservation. Bali became the Dutch colonial project's strange exception, the island they decided to turn into a museum rather than a factory. Here's the structural genius of how Aksara Bali survived. The Balinese Hindu religious system requires Aksara Bali for its functioning, not as a cultural preference, as a functional necessity. Priests, the Pemangku and the Pedanda, read from Lontar manuscripts written in Aksara Bali to conduct ceremonies. The sacred texts that govern Balinese cosmology, ritual calendars, medical practice, agricultural cycles, all written in Aksara Bali on palm leaf manuscripts. You cannot conduct a proper Balinese ceremony without access to those manuscripts. You cannot read those manuscripts without Aksara Bali literacy. The colonial powers could suppress economic activity, replace administrative scripts, disrupt trade networks, but they could not suppress religious practice without triggering the kind of resistance the Puputan had already demonstrated they should fear. So the script was never banned, it was never replaced. It retreated, or appeared to retreat, into the temple, and from inside the temple, it survived everything. The primary medium of Aksara Bali is the Lontar manuscript, palm leaf books made from the Borassus flabellifer palm, cut into long rectangular strips, inscribed with a stylus called a pangutik, and then rubbed with a mixture of lampblack and coconut oil to make the incised characters visible. The palm leaves are then strung together through a hole at each end, sandwiched between carved wooden covers and tied shut. They look like nothing else in the world. Balinese Lontar manuscripts cover everything: sacred Hindu cosmological texts, medical recipes, poetry, astronomical calendars, musical notation, the genealogies of royal families. The Gedong Kirtya Library in Singaraja, Bali, founded in 1928, holds the largest collection of Lontar manuscripts in the world. Around 3,000 surviving manuscripts, written in Aksara Bali, still being used, still being added to. Hanacaraka, the Javanese script, has a creation myth that is unlike any other writing system's origin story. The legend of Aji Saka, a mythical hero king named Aji Saka, came to Java, conquered a demon king, and left 2 loyal servants behind, one guarding his treasures, one accompanying him. He told them, "Do not give the treasures to anyone but me." Then he sent the second servant back to retrieve the treasures. The 2 servants met, each loyal to the same master, each given contradictory instructions. They fought each other to the death. When Aji Saka heard, he was devastated. To honor both servants, he composed an elegy using all 20 letters of the Javanese script, each letter used exactly once. Hanacaraka, da tasawala, pa dajayanya, magabathananga. There were 2 messengers. They were equal in strength. Here are their bodies. The Javanese script is named after a funeral poem. Every child who learns it begins with that elegy. Hanacaraka, the Javanese script, was the dominant writing system of one of the most sophisticated and powerful court cultures in Southeast Asian history. The great Javanese kingdoms of Mataram, Majapahit, and their successors produced literature, law codes, calendars, and poetry in Hanacaraka for centuries. When the Dutch East India Company arrived in Java in the 17th century and gradually consolidated control through the 18th and 19th centuries, the same familiar mechanism engaged. Latin script became the administrative language. Economic advancement required Latin literacy. The colonial education system taught Latin, not Hanacaraka. And Java, unlike Bali, was the economic heartland of the Dutch East Indies, subjected to far more intensive administrative, agricultural, and cultural disruption. By the mid-20th century, active Hanacaraka literacy had declined so sharply that surveys found most young Javanese people could recognize the script but could not read it. The myth was remembered, the letters were remembered, the ability to use them had almost gone. But here's what's happening right now. Driving into Yogyakarta, the cultural capital of Java, the city of the Sultan, you pass under a series of ceremonial arches. And those arches, since a government initiative in the early 2000s, now display Hanacaraka script alongside Latin text, not hidden, not archival, on a main road in heavy traffic. The city of Yogyakarta has mandated Hanacaraka instruction in its schools. The special region of Yogyakarta, which retains a unique semi-autonomous status under its sultan, has made Hanacaraka literacy a formal component of regional cultural policy. In Solo, the other great Javanese cultural center, the story is similar. Hanacaraka appears on street signs, on government buildings, on menus in traditional restaurants. The script that named itself after a funeral poem is, improbably, writing new stories. Quick pause right here. We've just covered 2 scripts with completely different survival stories. Aksara Bali survived by embedding itself so deeply in religious practice that colonial power couldn't reach it. Hanacaraka nearly died in Java's more intensive colonial environment and is now being revived by government policy. So here's my question. Which of those 2 survival mechanisms do you think is more powerful long-term? Embedding a script in religion or embedding it in government policy? Drop your answer below. There's no wrong answer here. This is a live debate among linguists and cultural preservation scholars. I want to know what you think. Okay, I want to get uncomfortable for a minute, because the Bali story has a shadow side that most scripts don't have, and it's important. Here's the tension that Aksara Bali survival creates that most other script revival stories don't have to deal with. Because the script survived inside religious and ceremonial practice, it has become, for millions of tourists, part of the Bali aesthetic. The beautiful script on the temple walls, the elegant inscriptions on the ceremonial cloth, the gorgeous characters on the offering baskets, photographed constantly, collected as visual texture, shared as spiritual content, without the name of the script, without the name of the culture that created it, without any understanding of what is actually written there. Cultural preservation scholars call this aesthetic extraction, the consumption of a culture's visual identity without engaging with its meaning. Aksara Bali is more photographed than almost any other indigenous script on Earth. It is also arguably less understood per photograph taken than almost any other script on Earth. Survival created a new problem that erasure never had to face. Now, to be fair, the Balinese relationship to this dynamic is complex and not monolithic. Many Balinese people are proud that their script is visible to the world, even if it's not understood. The sheer presence of Aksara Bali in the global visual vocabulary of Bali is, in some ways, a form of cultural assertion. It's there, it persists, it's on millions of Instagram accounts and Pinterest boards, even without correct attribution. Some Balinese educators argue that this global visual familiarity actually creates an entry point. Tourists who see the script fall in love with the aesthetic and then go looking for what it actually says. And some of them find Balinese script courses, some of them find the Lontar manuscript collections, some of them become, in small ways, advocates for preservation. The tourist gaze is not purely extractive, but it is rarely transformative, and there's a difference. So across this entire series, Baybayin, Lontara, Batak, Kulitan, Aksara Bali, and Hanacaraka, a question keeps presenting itself. What actually determines whether a script survives? Let me give you the answer. Linguists and cultural preservation scholars who study script death have identified 3 variables that determine whether a writing system survives colonial pressure. Variable 1, utility. Does the script still do something that matters, something the replacement script cannot do? Aksara Bali scored maximum on this variable. You cannot conduct Balinese religious practice without it. Baybayin scored near 0. The colonial system provided complete utility replacement through Latin script. Variable 2, community. Is there an active community of practitioners who teach it, use it, and pass it on? Aksara Bali again scores maximum. The priest class maintained continuous practice. Hanacaraka scored low by the mid-20th century. The community of active readers had contracted to specialists. Variable 3, material. Does the script exist on durable materials that can outlast the colonial period? Aksara Bali's Lontar manuscripts survive because palm leaf, properly stored, is remarkably durable. Baybayin was on bamboo and leaves. They rotted. 3 variables. Every script we've covered in this series can be plotted on this framework, and every revival movement is essentially a community trying to rebuild whichever variable collapsed. Now here's where the framework gets complicated, and this is the part that linguists actually argue about at conferences. Government institutional support, the kind Hanacaraka is receiving in Yogyakarta right now, scores high on the utility and community variables in the short term. Mandate the script in schools, put it on street signs, fund calligraphy courses. Script visibility goes up, literacy rates go up. But here's the counterargument. Institutional support creates institutional dependency. If the government mandate ends, if the next administration decides to cut the cultural heritage budget, or if the Sultan's special status changes, what happens to Hanacaraka? Aksara Bali doesn't have that vulnerability. It doesn't depend on a government decision. It depends on the continuation of religious practice. And Balinese Hindu religious practice is not going to end with a budget cut. The question of which survival mechanism is more durable, religious embedding or government mandate, is genuinely open, and the honest answer is probably you need both, but they create different kinds of fragility. Here's something that surprised me in the research for this series, and I think will surprise you too. Across every single script revival movement we've covered, Baybayin, Lontara, Kulitan, Hanacaraka, and Aksara Bali, one of the most energetic groups of people doing the reviving is the diaspora. Not the people still living in the home islands, the people who left. Filipino Americans learning Baybayin in Los Angeles, Indonesian Dutch Bugis people attending Lontara workshops in Amsterdam, Kapampangan communities in Canada funding Kulitan educational materials, Javanese expats in Singapore learning Hanacaraka online. There is something about distance from the homeland that creates an urgency around cultural preservation that proximity sometimes doesn't. When everything around you is the majority culture, when you are the minority, the question of what makes you specifically yourself becomes existential in a way it doesn't when you're surrounded by people who share your background. There's a specific psychological dynamic that researchers studying heritage language and script learning have identified in second-generation diaspora communities. The first generation, the people who actually emigrated, often suppressed their cultural identity as a survival strategy. Assimilation was practical. Speaking the majority language, adopting majority cultural markers, building a life in the new country, that required energy that couldn't always be spent on preservation. The second generation grows up with the assimilation mostly done, and then in their 20s and 30s, they start asking, what did we lose? Not with blame toward the first generation, most understand why it happened, but with a hunger to go back and find it. And the ancient script is one of the most powerful things to find, because it's not just a language, which you might only half remember. It's a visual identity. It's something you can literally wear, something you can make with your hands, something you can look at and say, this is mine. This was always mine. All right, we've now covered 5 scripts across 3 episodes of this series: Baybayin, Lontara, Bakak, Kulitan, Hanacaraka, and Aksara Bali. And I want to put the full picture on the table, because when you see them all together, something becomes visible that you can't see when you look at any one of them individually. These scripts are not relics, they are not museum pieces, they are not heritage projects designed to give people a warm feeling about their ancestors before they go back to their regular lives. They are active, living attempts by communities of human beings to maintain a broader relationship with time that colonialism allowed them to have. Colonialism contracted the temporal horizon. It said, what matters is now. What matters is commerce, administration, advancement, the present tense demands of the colonial economy. The pre-colonial past was primitive. It was over. Move forward. And these script revival movements are all in their different ways saying, no, we get to hold both. We get to be modern and rooted. We get to write in 2 alphabets and belong fully to the present. And now let's go back to where we started, the script you've already seen. Because what I really meant by that, what I was actually pointing at, is bigger than Aksara Bali being on Instagram. Every one of these scripts has been hiding in plain sight. In the curved shape of a letter on a temple gate you photographed and never identified. In the genealogy your grandparents kept in a language you can't read. In the tattoo on your uncle's arm that you always assumed was just decorative. In the word your grandmother uses for something that has no translation in English. The scripts are in plain sight. They were always in plain sight. What changed, what is changing right now in 2026, in community workshops and university syllabi and calligraphy studios and congressional debates, is that more and more people are stopping to look, actually look, and ask, what does that say? And here's a genuinely practical thought before we get to the emotional close. If you are planning to visit Bali, Java, Sulawesi, Sumatra, or the Philippines, you now know something that almost no tourist knows. You know the names of the scripts on the walls. You know the name Aksara Bali. You know that the palm leaf manuscripts are called Lontar. You know the priest reading from one is called a pemangku. You know the Javanese arch you'll drive under entering Yogyakarta carries the Hanacaraka script. This knowledge costs you nothing. It takes up no space in your luggage, but it transforms the experience from aesthetic consumption to actual encounter. You stop being a camera pointed at beautiful surfaces. You become someone who is genuinely present in the place you traveled thousands of miles to visit. That is not a small thing. That is the whole point of travel. I want to tell you about something specific that happened in Bali in 2018 that I think captures this entire series in one moment. The regional government of Bali introduced a formal mandate requiring all primary school students to learn Aksara Bali as part of their standard curriculum. It was not controversial. It passed without significant opposition. The reason it passed without opposition is that most Balinese parents already wanted it. Their children were growing up in a world of Instagram and TikTok and English-language pop culture, fully connected to the global present, and the parents wanted to make sure that same child also knew how to read the inscription on the temple their family had prayed at for 1,000 years. They didn't see it as a choice between modernity and tradition. They never did. That was always a colonial framing. The Balinese parents voting for Aksara Bali in the school curriculum were voting for the same thing the Filipino-American getting a Baybayin tattoo was voting for: the right to be whole, the right to hold more than one timeline at once. Now, if you've been following this series from the beginning, you've noticed that each episode ends with a tease for a script that hides something unexpected. And I'm not going to break that pattern now, because there is a script family we haven't covered yet. One that didn't come from Brahmi, one that came from a completely different direction. A script that moved through the Islamic world along trade routes that had nothing to do with India and arrived in parts of Southeast Asia to create a completely separate literary tradition that coexisted with the Brahmi scripts for centuries. In some places, it replaced them. In some places, it merged with them. In some places, it created something entirely new. That family of scripts and the extraordinary literature it produced is where this series goes next, and it is going to surprise you. Before the CTAs, one more thought, because this is the third episode of this series, and I realize something has been building across all three that I want to name directly. In every episode we've covered, there is a moment where a community faced a choice, though most of them never experienced it as a choice. It was simply the conditions of their lives under colonialism. Write in the new script and survive economically. Write in the old script and preserve what mattered. Most people, most of the time, chose economic survival, and they should not be blamed for that. They were feeding families. They were navigating power structures they did not create. But across every culture we've covered, in Bali, in Java, in Sulawesi, in Sumatra, in Pampanga, in Luzon, there were always some people who kept writing in the old script. Priests, scholars, storytellers, grandmothers, people who wrote not because it was useful or economically rational, but because the script was carrying something they were not willing to put down. They could not know their choice would matter. They wrote anyway. And because they wrote anyway, we are here, having this conversation in 2026 about scripts that were supposed to be dead. There is no version of this revival that exists without those people. Remember them. That is it for episode 3 of the Lost Script series. Aksara Bali, the script that survived by hiding inside religion. Hanacaraka, the Javanese script that almost didn't make it and is now carved into city arches. Before you go, 2 things. 1. Share this video. Specifically, if you know anyone who has been to Bali and has photos of temple walls on their phone without knowing what the script says, send this to them. That is exactly the person this video was made for. 2. Your comment question this week. Which survival mechanism do you trust more long-term? Religious embedding or government mandate? Drop it below. I read every answer. If you're new here, this is episode 3 of a series. Go back and watch the Baybayin episode and the Lontara Batak Kulitan episode first. The full picture is worth it. Subscribe and ring the bell. Episode 4 covers a completely different script family, a completely different origin story, and honestly, one of the most surprising things we've found in researching this entire series. And if this video gave you something, like it. 2 seconds. It matters enormously. We'll see you in episode 4. And before you close this tab, look up the next photo you took in Bali or Java or the Philippines. Really look at it. See if there's a script hiding in it that you didn't notice before. There probably is. Salamat, Terima kasih, Suksma.